Welcome back to the Nebraska Furniture Mart Locker Room Show, where I'm joined now by Breland Moore and Jared Kohler for tonight's Roundtable. All right, guys, fingers crossed that sports will in fact return in the coming weeks, which means new, amazing sports performances from the players that we love. But as we wait, let's take a look back at a few players that maybe don't get all the love that they really deserve. So in your opinion, who are the most underrated Kansas City sports athletes or athletes? Breland, I'll let you pick one.
You know my answer, Dani. I have said this time and time again, and this is a hill that I'm willing to die on. Kickers are people too, and kickers are the most important people because they are gimme points, but they're one of those things that you just kind of overlook until they're bad. Harrison Butker is amazing, and I think Chiefs fans just take him for granted sometimes just because, of course he's going to make the extra point. Of course, that doesn't happen, to every franchise here. You guys have something so special. And I think oftentimes he's really overlooked in terms of how good he is and how reliable he is in all types of weather as well. He never gets the interviews. Dani, you and I go over there all the time talking to him because he's also wonderful. Incredible. But, he just kind of falls in the background and doesn't really get that much attention when really and truthfully he is clutch time in and time out.
And he's so fun to talk to.
I love him.
Was it the very last game of the regular season where we walked over to him and we're like, you just set a Chiefs record and we are so excited for you. Like, can you talk about that a little bit? He's like, hang on, let me pull out my phone and make sure that I actually set that record. And let's do some math. And hang on, guys, 1 second. You're like, you are so humble and just so willing to talk to us like a normal person. I just think that he's so great and easy to work with. And I agree with you that I think he's definitely an underrated athlete here in Kansas City. Jared, you go back a little bit further?
Well, I want to give a little bit of a hot take for my honorable mention. I actually think Matt Castle is underrated.
Okay.
I know he sucked except for 1 year. That 2010 season, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. They won the division. He had an appendectomy mid-year. He went to the Pro Bowl. That was one of the best quarterback seasons in Chiefs history.
Okay.
I know, overall not good, but I think people forget that he was, for 1 year, good. But no, my actual answer, people that actually deserve a little bit more love, comes from a group that ESPN actually a couple of weeks ago ranked the 5 worst NFL teams of the past decade. In the 2012 Kansas City Chiefs were number 2. And I think that's a little bit unfair, but I think it speaks to the perception of the guys that were around that time period, 2-14. But if you remember, there was actually 7 Pro Bowlers on a team that went 2-14. And that makes no sense, and it shows how bad management and coaching staff was. But there's a trio there that I think deserve love, considering they played on one of the worst teams of all time: Jamal Charles, Tamba Hali, and Derek Johnson. 3 Ring of Honor guys who don't have Super Bowl rings. They weren't a part of this last team, and I don't want their names to get lost in history, lost in the shuffle, because they played important roles kind of bridging the gap. All 3 of them were drafted in either Dick Vermeil or Herm Edwards in that time frame. Then they went through Todd Haley, Romeo Crennel, and then finished their careers with Andy Reid. But their peaks were on bad teams, and they could have left. They could have demanded a trade like Tony Gonzalez. They could have signed elsewhere and said, you know what, I could get more money or could have more playoff wins elsewhere. But they wanted to stay in Kansas City, and they weren't shy about that. They said, we love the people here, we love the team, we think we can turn this around. And they were paid off. They were a part of winning teams at the end of their career, but I don't think they get enough love because they simply were on bad teams. But at their peak, they were all incredible players, and I think it's important to realize that the love affair between Chiefs fans and the Chiefs never was lost, even through a few bad seasons, because that's something we talk about with the Royals, where when they're losing 100 games for 3 straight years, that love affair with the town kind of got lost. But because I think there was that trio of players that you could go to Arrowhead Stadium and you could be proud to root for those guys. You could wear a number 91 jersey on your back and know that Tamba Hali was going to give his all, even if they lost by 20 points. And so I think having those guys that were proud to be Chiefs, even in their darkest days, was underrated, and it kept fans engaged. It kept them loving the Chiefs, so that when Andy Reid came to town and they did start winning and those guys had more success, that love affair was still there. And I think those 3 are underrated because of it.
Jared, what's crazy is I actually got my first broadcasting job back in 2011 in Dodge City, Kansas. And my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, took me to my very first Chiefs game at Arrowhead Stadium in September of 2012, and we paid like $50 for front row seats to see the Chiefs play. Yeah, it has obviously changed a lot since then, and the stadiums are sold out and packed, but being able to see those guys and how well they played, even though they were on bad teams, it still made me fall in love with Arrowhead and fall in love with the Chiefs team because of what they were able to do and kind of the skill that you saw out there. Future Chiefs Hall of Famers for sure. And you bringing that up brought back all sorts of memories and how crazy, how far we've come since 2012. And now that we're in 2020 with a MVP and a Super Bowl ring on all of their fingers. It's kind of crazy to think. Anyways, so I have a theme this week with underrated moments and athletes, and it's going to be that Alex Smith era. I think Alex Smith is one of the most underrated athletes in Kansas City sports history because of the turning of the page and what his era meant to Kansas City Chiefs. And we mentioned 2012 and all of the instability that happened until Andy Reid got here. And even then, he started changing things over. He brought in Alex Smith, which was that first step. And the way that he handled himself, knowing that he was not necessarily the guy for the long term. He was that middleman who was setting these guys up for success in the future. And what he did for Patrick Mahomes and allowing him to be his mentor and being positive and optimistic about where this team was going and what he did with Andy Reid. I just think it's really, really hard to find people and competitors that are still willing to be great at what they do while also knowing the future of what's to come and knowing that you're not the long-term guy, especially at quarterback. So I definitely think that Alex Smith has to be my underrated athlete in KC.